All right, well, let's go. Ready on the count of three. 1, 2. Hello and welcome to the Parousia Podcast, a brand new series we've launched this year with 3 hosts. I'm one of them, Charbel, your host, along with my co-host, Mark Griffin. And you've heard of us earlier in the series. I shared my testimony along with Mark, but we have a third host, Phillip Brooks, and it's his turn now to be drilled. And we're going to ask him some questions about his personal faith journey and how he came to get involved in this work. I'll first say hello to Mark. How you going, Mark?
Good, Charbel. How are you doing?
Doing really well. It's a bit tough now in the lockdown. We are recording in separate locations, as we can see, due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We're praying everyone's safe. It's unfortunate we have to do this, but let's pray that this will end soon and we can be all together again in the studio.
Absolutely. We had this one lined up to go quite a while ago, and we did yours first, Charbel, then mine, and they were both released, and we hadn't done Phil's yet. So Phil hasn't actually been contributing any discussion to this podcast as yet, pending this interview. And we've been doing other things since, and it's been really challenging to get this one lined up, actually. So here we are now, and from this point, everyone will know a bit more about Phillip Brooks, and then Phil will start contributing episodes to the podcast as well, which will be fantastic.
Excellent. I'm very excited to introduce Phil. Phillip Brooks has been involved with Parousia for the last year and a half or so, but he's also been helping a lot with the Cradio platform, the audio engineering side of things. But we're going to get to know a little bit more about him, his personal family, faith journey. So let's dive in. Phillip Brooks, g'day. How you going?
Charbel, I'm very good. How are you?
Yeah, always. Well, we could always be better, but why complain? No one cares anyway, but we're always blessed. Blessed is right. The right term.
Yeah, I think we're all sort of adjusting to the new normal, working from home, having a social life from home, and, for me, studying from home as well.
You say
That's
that
right.
you're hoping this is temporary normal, and there might be a new normal after it, but you'll be a little bit closer to the previous normal, let's hope.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, right. So it's a new temporary normal for now.
Phillip, you're at uni at the moment, so all your classes are online. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. So I think this semester we got 1 week in of studying on campus, and then we got an email saying, hold up, everybody stay home. We're not doing that anymore, and they've since moved everything online. So my bedroom has become my office, my sort of classroom, and everything else in between.
Yeah, it's been tough. Yeah, it's a global thing, and I guess we do pray that this will come to an end very soon, sooner rather than later. But well, here we are. Thank God we can connect via the internet and with the technology we have today. But let's dive into your story, Phillip. Let's introduce you to our listeners, our viewers. Let's start at the very beginning. Who is Phillip Brooks? Are you a Cradio Catholic?
Yeah, so I was born a Catholic 21 years ago, and I had a great upbringing in the faith. But then at some point, due to whatever reasons they were at the time, my family stopped going to mass. So there were a good few years there, in late primary school and early high school, where we'd sort of fallen away from the faith a little bit, and there was sort of a reignition into the taking the faith seriously at one point, and that was due mainly to one friend, a distant cousin, who enrolled in my school, and so we befriended each other. We became good friends, and him and his family took the faith very seriously. They went to the local parish, and he served mass. I then, he invited me to the youth group on Friday nights along with him. And so I would start going to that. That's sort of where I met Simon Carrington. He gave a talk at one point. So it's through going to that youth group, making friends with all of these people. My family became better friends with his family. So we started going to mass again on Sundays. And we built up these friendships of virtue. So, St. Thomas talks about these friendships that Aristotle has, the friendship of utility, friendships of pleasure, and friendships of virtue. Friendships of virtue are those friendships which call the other to be better than themselves, to grow in virtue. And it's these friendships which, when developed, sort of lead to fruitful evangelization. It's these friendships that need to exist in order to bring people closer to the faith. So that's very much how it happened for me. I think some people come to the faith through intellectual arguments, others through being attracted to the beauty of the church. With me, it was very much through relationships with different people that I started to take my faith seriously. I definitely had a solid upbringing. My grandparents were very faithful Catholics. They would take me to weekday mass during the school holidays when I would stay with them. And that's, where I learnt to start serving mass with my grandfather. And so, that the roots of the faith have always been there, but it wasn't until you start having these real relationships with people who take the faith seriously that you start to sort of take it seriously as well.
We are very good. Yeah, that's right. Good friends with Simon, and you can't pick a friendship of virtue as someone like that. He's great example. But how old were you at the time when you started serving?
So originally, I would have been in primary school, really young.
Okay.
But I didn't really know much about what it meant. I was just doing it because, my nannu, my grandfather, sort of got me to do it with him. He was an acolyte as well. It was after I started going back to mass that I started serving again. That would have been when I was about 16 or 17, I think.
Yeah, tell us about then. Do you remember the day? Is it a moment, or as you said, it was through friendships? But was it something that was gradual over time, or was there a moment you do remember where, wow, my faith is so important? When did it take you to that next level that it became real for you?
Yeah, I think sort of after going back to confession after a long time, that was really the moment that I started taking things very seriously again. I started going to more weekday masses, going to adoration, things that, even only a year before that point, I would have thought, is totally crazy. It was very shortly after that I went to my first Immaculata Mission School. Going down to Tasmania for 10 days and leaving my phone behind, would have been totally unheard of for me, even a year before that point. And so it was really in that time, and that I think would have been around the same time I sort of started serving mass as well.
What prompted you to the mission school? Was it someone that invited you, or did you read up on that yourself and you thought that sounded appealing? What actually prompted you to go down to that? And can you tell us a bit about the mission schools themselves and what's involved in that?
Yeah. So again, it was through relationships and good friendships. One of the religious brothers who was at our parish, after he left the order, became good friends with me, and he invited me to go down to this mission school. He said it was, he'd been on many retreats during his time as a Pauline, and he said that this retreat was better than all of them. So that sort of, I didn't have a job at the time, so I couldn't afford to go down there. And I said to God, if you find me a job before December so I can start saving up and go on this mission school, then I'll go. And so very quickly I found a job and so my decision was made for me. I went down there not really knowing too much of what to expect, other than the fact that you don't have your phone for 10 days. I'd never really been on a retreat before. I was a bit hesitant about this whole, not having your phone, not being able to check Facebook or talk to your family. Mum was very worried, but, I went down there and it was incredible. You find that you start speaking to people who are in front of you rather than people that are in your phone when you don't have it. Sitting down over dinner with people for 10 days. There were about 120 people there the first time I went. And by the end of the 10 days, every single one of them's name, and you've almost had a good conversation with every single one of them as well. So it's incredible how not being constantly distracted by the device in your pocket can lead you to have much more real relationships with those that are right there in front of you.
And that's not to say that these devices aren't useful, and that's not to say that the technology itself isn't useful, but we are so, I suppose, focused on the technology, on the device, on the connectivity, that we do forget that there are real people around us. And even now, at this point where we're recording this, we're having to do this using technology. What a fantastic tool we have to be able to continue. But it is also a distraction. And for you in your generation, I suppose you could say you're half a generation behind Charbel and myself. And when we were growing up, the mobile technology was becoming a thing, and you could see technology increasing at speed. But you're half a generation behind us again. You were born into technology, so that would be a massive thing for you to give away.
Yeah, it sure was. And it was confronting, especially the first few days. I struggled with it a little bit, but by the end of the retreat, by the end of the 10 days, I didn't want my phone back. It's incredible. And so many other people will tell you exactly the same thing who've been to mission schools, that, you don't want to go back to the real world after spending 10 days on retreat. And that can be said of any retreat, but in a special way, the abstaining from technology for 10 days makes you realize how much you don't actually need to be constantly connected.
So true. I was privileged to experience this retreat in Toowoomba this year, the 10 days. And I know what you're saying, you have to put your phone down, but it was such a moving experience to see so many young people taking their faith seriously, really opening up, being vulnerable, if you like, sharing their struggles. And you can see that, wow, you're not alone in this world. You're seeing other people your age really wanting to know more, wanting to deepen their faith. And it is very, very inspiring. It was inspiring for me after all these years being to so many talks and retreats to experience that. I thought it was quite special. So I highly recommend anyone to go to these summer schools with the Immaculata Sisters. But tell us, so post-retreat, so now I guess this is, would you say, a turning point or a reawakening at the end of this retreat? What did you end up doing after that?
Yeah, the retreat was, it really was something that took my faith to that next level. So, every day at the mission school, you start with, about 1.5 hours before the Blessed Sacrament saying the rosary. So you develop these really great habits that then, God willing, follow you along into your daily life after you get back. And that, thank God, was the case to an extent for me. I developed a much greater love of the Eucharist, which, through also serving at Mass, it's amazing, the great love that you develop for the Holy Mass. It's sort of like a snowball. The more you learn, the more you want to learn, the more you know, the more you can love it. But it was very shortly after that retreat that I started at university. So I enrolled at UTS, and I very quickly got involved with the Catholic Society on campus. So, there was a Dominican presence there. But the thing that struck me most of all was that there were so many other young, like-minded Catholics doing a very similar thing to me, studying at uni, whatever they were studying. I think in my first year at uni, I possibly spent just as much, if not more time at CathSoc events than in my actual classes. And I don't regret it, I think it was very, very well worth the time, because these friendships that you develop with these people, again, it all comes back to these relationships that you have, they're friendships that last for your whole life. Or at least for me, they've lasted the last 4 years for sure. But I think it's one of the greatest things that Cardinal Pell did while he was in Sydney, is investing in and developing these university chaplaincies at the universities in Sydney. Because I think it's at this time in young people's lives where they'll either keep the faith for the rest of their lives, or they'll fall away from practicing, and that's sort of where they'll end up. More often than not, I think this is the case. But
have you seen people that you have associated with throughout your university life that were fairly solid Catholics when they started, but were affected the other way by university lifestyle and have completely fallen away? Or is it just the circle of friends you've kept? Has that been, they've basically kept each other going?
Yeah, I generally find the flip side more often than not, at least in my circle of friends. I don't doubt that what you're saying happens, but I think fairly solid Catholics coming into university would seek out the Catholic society, and then they would, they may fall into our circle of friends, into the Catholic society, and then, continue on to have a strong faith life. But, indeed, I see many people who, perhaps went to Catholic schools, who are Catholic, and, you see them on O Day, they're going around looking at all the different societies and clubs they can join. And, they just walk on past the Catholic society. They might stop and say hi because they feel that Catholic guilt, that obligation to sort of stop and say hello. Yeah. But, you ask them, where did you go to school and all that sort of stuff. And they'll tell you that they went to a Catholic school, and then, that's all you see of them for the rest of the year. And it's sad because all of these people that you see walking around on O Day on campus, it struck me one day walking from the train station to the university that, and it's so busy walking from Central to Broadway. All of these people that you see walking along, every single one of them has a soul that will last for eternity. And they're going to spend that eternity either in one of two places, either in heaven or hell. There's no other options. Okay, there's no way out of those two ends to the roads. And that really drives my passion for working with the Catholic societies and my love for bringing people to the faith.
So what's your role with the Catholic Society currently at UTS?
At UTS, I'm currently the president of the Catholic Society. And so, that just involves sort of wrangling the team, looking after them, making sure that we put on some events that will get people engaged. Because, as we know with very much experience from running events in Parousia, it takes a lot more than just advertising things online to get people to come to events. You really need to, shove these things in their faces, and they have to be good quality things that you're shoving in their faces so that they feel like they might be inclined to come. But this
is interesting. The event, tell us a bit more for those who don't know what the chaplaincy is, these and the Catholic Society. I guess the difference between the two, and then what types of events specifically are we talking about on campus?
Yeah, so there's generally three bodies that offer services to Catholics in the tertiary education world. So you've got the individual Catholic societies at each university. So at each university, generally, you've got all your different societies. You've got, your beer society, your dog lovers society, and we've got the Catholic Society. That's the thing that I'm the president of. You've got your Catholic chaplaincies run by the Archdiocese in Sydney, which are at UTS, Macquarie University, UNSW, and Sydney University. And so they're staffed by people who the Archdiocese hires, and often they'll have a chaplain as well to say Mass for them and offer other, spiritual good stuff. And then you have the Australian Catholic Students Association, which is a national body of Catholic students. Their main event every year is a national conference, which they run, and that sort of connects all the different Catholic students around the country in knowing that they're not alone in standing up for the truth on their campus, and that they have friends all around Australia that are doing the same thing as them. The society and the chaplaincies both offer regular events on campus. So I mentioned things like daily Mass on campus. They offer different Bible studies, different discussion groups, men's nights and women's nights, and all that sort of stuff. If you are a Catholic student, I would really encourage you to get involved in your Catholic society on campus. And if one isn't there that's very established, I would encourage you to try and find other Catholics on your campus who have a desire for these things, and go to your diocese and ask them that they invest in you. Because, like I said earlier, it's really at this time that people will practice the faith, or they won't practice the faith for the rest of their lives. And so it's very important. And we're very, very lucky in Sydney to have these good established Catholic societies. one of the great events that's run throughout the year is the mid-year retreat. Unfortunately, this year it's had to be postponed due to the little plague that we have.
You've postponed the middle of the year, or you've postponed the retreat?
The retreat, Mark. It's been postponed. Yeah, I can't believe it. It's crazy. It's the first time in I don't know how many years that it won't be running. But such is the case with so many other things. But yeah, a lot of people, a lot of students who might sort of be coming to the Catholic Society throughout the year for the friendship element, they come to this retreat, and they have such a good time. It's a really good introduction to taking your faith more seriously, sort of like that Immaculata Mission School that we were talking about earlier.
That's fantastic. It sounds like there's so much action normally outside of this lockdown, but normally life on campus is very vibrant, and you've really built some strong friendships. Tell us then, why don't we move into the space where you got involved? I mean, you also got involved outside of university in other different apostolates. You want to touch on that as well?
Yeah, so I think through developing this great love of the Eucharist, first in the context of the mission school, and then through serving Mass, through being exposed to the liturgical diversity of the Church in university and outside of university as well, as I sort of began to take my faith more seriously, I came across the extraordinary form of the Mass, which, I hadn't really heard about until I was on a Catholic Answers forum one day, and I saw somebody mention this extraordinary form. I was like, "Oh, that looks interesting," and so I kept Googling it, and it seemed cool, but I didn't pay much notice to it. I saw it advertised at a parish near my house. It was on first Thursday nights every month, and so I went along one time, and it struck me straight away as something that was completely otherworldly. But at the same time, seeing the Mass in that context helped me to understand and appreciate the ordinary form of the Mass that I was so used to in a totally different way. You can see why the priests make certain gestures, why we say certain things and stand in certain ways, and we do different things at different times. It sort of unlocks a whole lot about the reasons behind what happens in the Mass, to see it in that context. It was really amazing, really profound, and I really loved it.
It's great. Those realizations you're talking about at such a young age, to appreciate the Mass to that degree, and I'm happy to hear that it's helped in both forms, the ordinary form and the extraordinary form, your understanding of what the Mass is. That's quite beautiful. Mark, sorry.
No, I was just going to say the same thing. I find it interesting that you make the link back from the extraordinary form to the ordinary form Mass, because you hear from so many people these days that the Mass itself has been completely destroyed, and to a certain extent, with the way Masses are celebrated, you can understand that thinking. But you were able to see the ordinary form of the Mass come alive, having witnessed the extraordinary form.
Yeah, for sure. It definitely does unlock a lot of the meaning behind the Mass. I think that can even happen apart from the old rite, if people look into the Mass themselves. But certainly, in the context of going to the old Mass, it sort of makes a lot more apparent why certain things happen. Like why the priest makes certain gestures over the Eucharist at different points in the Eucharistic prayer. Some things might have been lost in the translation from the Old Mass to the New Mass, but in the Old Mass, it's all there. And so you sort of see the fullness of how it once was, and why, that makes sense now. So there's, why he holds his fingers in different ways, and, the different postures and stuff.
The slightest different change in certain gestures as well can add a whole more profound, deeper, profound meaning to it, can't they?
Yeah, for sure. And nothing is wasted. No word is wasted. All of the gestures in the Mass, all of the rubrics, all of the words that are written in the Missal, were all put there intentionally. It was crafted and organically developed and perfected over centuries. And so there's so much richness that you can get from meditating on the Holy Mass. Every word of it has great spiritual unction. But, after being exposed to it, on those first Thursday nights in the parish near my house, I sort of discovered that there were other places near me that celebrated it more often. And so I started going to them, and it was a very slow process, very sort of organic attraction towards the old rite that led me to sort of where I am now, which is attending the old Mass every Sunday and during the week as well.
Here's a question for you. When you go from, you regularly attend the extraordinary form Masses now, when you go to a Novus Ordo Mass, do you yourself feel like this is lacking? Do you feel like this is complete? How do you actually feel when you go back to the Novus Ordo Mass?
Mark, it's a good question. And I think before I answer it, I'd like to make a distinction on how somebody should feel attending Holy Mass versus how I do feel. I think sort of the correct response to attending any Mass is, a great sense of awe and love for the Eucharist, because that's what the Mass is about, But I think, sometimes due to our fallen human nature, myself, I tend to sort of see in the new Mass and a lot of things that I see, this has been taken out here, and that isn't how it once was, even though it's still the Mass. That there are things that have changed that I think aren't as edifying or aren't as conducive to a fruitful prayer as they are in the old Mass. And I speak to people, and some of them will say the same thing, that that's all that they can think of when they're going to the Novus Ordo. But I think if you're in a situation where you are attending the Holy Mass, you should really just focus on the goods that are there, and not really worry so much, at least while you're in there, while you're in the moment, not worry so much about what isn't there, what's lacking. But and
just to clarify the question, I suppose, as well, it's how we feel at Mass is not why we go to Mass. We're not going to Mass to come away with that warm, fuzzy feeling, oh, that was nice, wasn't it? But that's not obviously the intention to go to Mass. But if we are paying attention, we can very easily see liturgical abuses or things that aren't quite right. And surely, I suppose, in that instance, we are able to feel disappointed, or I don't really quite know how to word it, but obviously, like I'm saying, it's not what we feel that's ultimately what's important, but it does affect us.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of people, don't like going to the old Mass, usually for three main reasons. They say that, they can't understand anything, that the priest turns their back on them, and that there's no active participation. But Pope Pius XII, in his encyclical Mediator Dei, explains that the Mass has four ends. So adoration, thanksgiving, atonement, and petition. And if you notice, none of those ends have anything to do with, they're not directed towards the people. They're all directed towards God. And so you're right in saying that, it doesn't matter about our feelings when we're attending Mass. What matters is, the fact that we are giving praise and adoration, thanksgiving and petition to God. And so, and people say they can't understand everything. If you start going to the old Mass, regularly, you understand things just as well as you do the new Mass. It's how Catholics had attended Mass for, over 1,200 years, quite a bit over 1,200 years. And, it's just very, very natural after you sort of get used to it.
It's not a conversation with the priest, ultimately. The priest isn't there to have a conversation with the congregation. That's right. He's there speaking on behalf of the congregation. I know a priest in Melbourne who was celebrating a Novus Ordo Mass once, and after Mass, a woman came up to him and said, "Father, can you speak up through Mass? We can't always hear you very well." And he just said to her, but I'm not actually speaking to you. And just to make the point that it's not him having a conversation with her, he's leading the worship side of the worship aspect of it. He's leading the congregation, speaking on their behalf. And
Well, yeah,
I found that a really interesting interaction that he had with that woman, just to put everything in perspective.
yeah, that's right. I think if somebody walked into a Novus Ordo Mass for the first time as well, they wouldn't really understand a whole lot either. So, it's more than just speaking in English that will make people understand what goes on in Mass.
I think it's also sad to say, though, that if someone walked into a Novus Ordo Mass every week, every Sunday, for the first 15, 20 years of their life, they still might not necessarily understand everything very well, because there's such a lack of understanding of what's actually there and happening. And people that we have the resource at Parousia, Scott Hahn's resource, the Lamb's Supper, and people read that or listen to the audio version of that, and the response they give is, I never understood how much was actually happening and the importance of what's actually happening in Mass. And I go to Mass every week. So, yeah, we really do need to increase the education around what is actually going on at a Mass.
That's right. Yeah. I think
the words out of my mouth, Mark. That's spot on. We need to re-educate our culture today, especially starting with young adults and teenagers and even little ones. And if we can do that, people will appreciate what is going on at the Mass. It's heaven on earth, literally. We're participating in something greater than we can imagine. It's not just a performance or a concert that you're going to. It's actually it's worship, and it is the priest leading in that worship, and we participate through the priest, the sacrifice.
Yeah, that's right.
There's so much misunderstanding out there. As
one of our good friends said, the problem in the church in the 60s and 50s wasn't, a problem with the liturgy or a problem with the Mass or a problem with anything the church was doing liturgically. It was a crisis in catechesis. It was the fact that the people weren't educated. They didn't know what was going on, and so they didn't appreciate it.
Spot on. The importance of formation and evangelization, of course. Tell us, Phil, that you, when I first met you, you were involved in Cradio. How did you end up getting involved as a volunteer at Cradio?
Yeah, so I started, visiting Cradio because I had a friend who worked there, John Jagurdis, and he sort of invited me to, see if I was interested in learning how to edit podcasts. And in high school, I'd done a little bit of video editing, and it was interesting. I enjoyed it, and so I said sure. And so he sort of showed me the ropes and showed me how it's all done. And so I would, come back and help them out every now and then. Maybe once every couple of months. Visiting the office and editing a podcast here and there. But it was when I had to do an internship, my first internship for my degree, that I approached John and I was like, do you think I can do an internship with Cradio? And so he put me in touch with the manager at the time, Luke Strayer, who is now Brother Maximilian with the Immaculata. And he was like, oh, it's funny you're calling me today because I'm retiring next week. Like, what do you mean you're retiring? You're like 25. And he was like, oh, no, I'm joining the religious life and I'm giving Cradio to Parousia. I was like, oh, okay. So he said, you'll have to come and meet Charbel and see if they'll take you. And so I did, and here I am.
I remember that day in North Sydney at the offices there in Cradio, and you asked, and I thought, what perfect timing, just as we were ready to sign papers and do the whole transition. What a blessing. So we inherited Phillip Brooks as a result of the whole transfer Cradio within the Parousia family. And so we're blessed to have you. And I'm glad now that we're developing. I mean, all the experience you've learnt over the years with the podcasting work is now developed into now the latest project of ours, the Parousia Podcast. So, thank you, Phil, for getting it going there. It's quite exciting.
Yeah, this Parousia Podcast definitely is a fruit of all those years of learning how to edit, learning how to do the recording and uploading and processing of the different podcasting things that go on.
And this might be only your third episode that you've featured in. Obviously, you were in the first interview with Charbel's testimony and then the second one with mine. But you've had your hands on every episode. You still do the edits of the episodes and bring them all together in the different platforms. So make it look nice.
Yeah. No, I try to. My background is definitely in audio. So, all of the video processing is a little bit new to me, but I'm getting my head around it now, especially with the extra time I have being in isolation, but we put together this podcast. We try to get at least one episode out a week. And hopefully now I'll be starting to interview some guests as well.
We're looking forward to that. We hope, this is an opportunity for the people who have been watching and following the podcast to get to know the man who's been behind it all, editing and processing all this, getting things prepared. But you are a co-host in your own right, and we want to start seeing more of your face with future podcasts. So very much looking forward to those interviews in the future.
I look forward to hosting them. It's going to be great.
Absolutely. Mark, should we have a little bit of fun here? We see...
I'd never say no to a bit of fun.
But we see Phillip, inside the office, and he's got a bit of a sense of humour, as we know.
Just a little one. I wouldn't say it's great, but it's developing. Yeah, we're teaching.
Right. Once you learn his style, you get it. But I think it might be nice to let's really share with the audience a bit about Phil's personality and maybe any stories you have. Funny ones of Phil in the office. Just a lot of quirkiness.
What comes to mind is just his name.
His name. That's right.
That's right. Started with us about the spelling of his name, and he's come in. He said, "I'm Philip," and is that one L or two? That's two L's. And so it's like, okay, Philip with two L's. That's not unheard of. My dad would disapprove with Philip with one L, but that's okay. But then we learned later that Phil was also with two L's, and that really confused the Parousia staff. It must be said. And it became the ongoing joke that everything with one L has to now have two L's because Phil has got two L's. The funniest part about that is I think we've now actually convinced you, Phil, that Phil has only got one L, even if Philip has got two, haven't we?
Hey, look, okay. I'd lived my whole life with people calling me Philip, written, and only calling me Phil by ear. And so I'd never really, I don't know, it never occurred to me that when you write Phil, you do it with one L. And it just looked weird. I've seen Philip written so many times with two L's, and I think I've finally conceded that. Yeah, Philip does have two L's, and Phil has one.
That was a fairly recent concession. You've been with us for quite some time now.
It's taken a while to convince him. Absolutely,
it took about a good year.
What's Phil, learning a bit more just about you as a person, what sort of things outside of Parousia world, what are your interests? What podcasts do you listen to? What music do you listen to?
Yeah, look, I do love classical music. I enjoy, I study engineering, so obviously that's one of my main interests. I enjoy cars, my car in particular. Ooh, that makes me happy.
We know when you're coming, that's for sure.
Yes.
That's right. We can hear you coming.
It's a loud car. For such a small vehicle, it's very loud.
Yeah, it goes all right. So old technology interests me very greatly. So I think where classical music and old technology collide, you get vinyl records. There was a phase in my life where I was very much into vinyl records, learning how they work. So I've got one set up downstairs that I enjoy listening to.
Well, vinyl's coming back. It might be a phase that comes back.
Right?
Maybe Parousia needs to invest in vinyls.
My goodness, we've just transitioned from cassettes to CDs, and now we're transitioning from CDs to the digital world. Are we going to go full circle, come back to vinyls now?
Yeah, you can.
Yeah. Tell us more about your siblings. How many siblings do you have?
I have one younger brother. His name is Stephen. And he's in year 11 this year.
I asked before, what podcast, what when you're tuning into a podcast, what are you keen on?
Yeah, so I think my two favorite podcasts would be Pints with Aquinas by Matt Fradd and Catholic Stuff You Should Know, which is a podcast run by 4 priests, and they have, just great banter with one another. They, their episodes are filled with, good, like, Catholic stuff that you should know. As the name suggests.
Did you notice, Charbel, that he actually failed that test? He said that was his 2 favourites. I don't mind them being his 2nd and his 3rd favourite podcast. So he's failed the Parousia podcast test.
I think that goes without saying. I'm hoping that that's its own category, right?
Of course it is, yeah. I spend, days and days listening to Parousia podcasts, far more than I get a chance to listen to all those other podcasts.
It's fair to say you've listened to more Parousia podcasts than anyone else in the world so far. So,
yep. Yeah, that needs to change. Okay, you people need to start, going through our archives. We've got, this would be over 10 episodes now out that you can sink your teeth into, and there's many more to come.
That's right.
And some good guests as well. We've got Scott Hahn, you've interviewed Steve Ray, Charbel. We've interviewed a few of the locals here in Australia, a few of the prominent local Catholics, and there's some really good content up there, and we've got a big lineup to come. There's a lot of things in the works, so absolutely register to the podcast or subscribe. Is that the word, Phil? Get my language right. Subscribe to the podcast.
Yeah, subscribe to the podcast. I've recently put a button on the Parousia Podcast website. So if you go to parousiamedia.com/podcast, you'll see a big button that says, subscribe to the exclusive podcast mailing list or something. If you click on that button, you'll get an email every time we upload a new podcast. And you might even get some extra insights from the editor himself, which will, just bring you on into the inside. We might ask you, we might ask you things like, what sort of content do you want to see in the future in the Parousia podcast world? So you might have an inside chance into forming how the podcast evolves and develops.
How can people listen to these podcasts? Can you tell us?
Yeah, so the main hub is parousiamedia.com/podcast. That's where you're going to find everything all the time, always the most up to date. If you go there, you'll be able to see all the different platforms that you can subscribe to the podcast on. So this podcast, when we have the chance to, more often than not, it goes up as a video podcast as well on our YouTube channel. So you can subscribe there. You can also find this podcast in its audio form on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, all your regular podcasting apps. I use a great one called Pocket Casts that I really enjoy. Anywhere that you can access a podcast, you can access the Parousia podcast. You have no excuse.
Yeah, highly recommend people do that. It doesn't cost anything. Subscribe, you get all the notifications, and please try catch up to all the previous shows we've done. We're looking forward to more from Mark, who's interviewing. He's got a bit of a lineup as well. We've got coming up Philip's guests. I've got quite a few, and we may combine sometimes. It might be Mark and Phil. It might be myself with Phil, myself with Mark, or just ourselves. So I'm very excited about what's coming in the horizon, especially now in the time when a lot of people are in lockdown. We can still provide lots of free content so people can listen to from home or anywhere they happen to be. So yeah, thanks for all your service and your hard effort in this, Phil.
Oh, it's good
with
fun.
One L. That's Phil with one L.
Phil with one L. Philip with 2 L's.
Right.
Yeah.
Mark, anything else you want to add to this discussion? I think we've introduced Phil. Okay.
I think he's sufficiently introduced, but definitely looking forward to hearing more of him in the podcast world. So start building up your archive there, Phil, and we'll release them as we go along. Yeah.
Fantastic. Can't wait.
Thanks for being on, Phil, as the guest this time, and looking forward to seeing you as the host in the future podcasts.
What do you think about being the guest, Phil?
Oh, look, it's not as bad as I thought. Once you get rolling,
I don't think we picked on you that much.
No, I think we're okay. I wasn't expecting the 2 L's controversy to be made public, but that's okay.
Just make sure you don't edit that bit out.
Yeah, this one will need to be approved before we release it. Got to be careful what he does with it, Charbel.
Well, look, thank you very much. Let's hope and pray that many people are touched by these podcasts and continue a great effort and work. And it is my prayer that this will inspire many people, not just in Australia, but around the world. So that's thank you, Phil, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Awesome. All right. That's another Parousia Podcast. I'm Charbel, one of your 3 hosts, and that's another show. Until next time, God bless. Hello and welcome to the Parousia Hour. I'm Charbel, your host.
Parousia Podcast, Charbel.
It's Parousia Podcast.
Well done. I'm glad we're pre-recording this. Parousia Podcast.
This is the Parousia Podcast.
I'm getting 7 years of habits out. Okay. Here we go.